All right, guys. Hi. This is the review session for the entire agriculture unit. We went over this in class before we actually took or the day before we took the test, and I seem to believe that it helped you guys a lot. Doesn't have absolutely everything you need to know about agriculture on there, but it's a lot, and it'll tell you kind of in order what things you should study for agriculture. But there's really only 10 questions on the effort or on the multiple choice questions tomorrow that really deal with agriculture. So look for big ideas. Okay. First up, for just so you know, for AP testing next Tuesday, all right, on the 12th. Okay. Let's have it to where I am pinned. There we go. AP testing begins at 3 p.m. That's when the test actually starts. But you need to log in at 2:30 p.m. All right? Because here's the thing. That gives you 30 minutes to make sure you have everything set on your desktop, everything set on the desk wherever you're taking this. All right? You have all of your notes, you have your ISN, you have your textbook there, you have everything you need to take this test. Okay? You need to have all that done, and you need to be logged in at 2:30 because frankly, I don't believe that the AP College Board website will work correctly for everyone if everyone's trying to actually log in at 3 when the test starts. So I'm telling you, log in 30 minutes early. That's when it really opens up. It opens up at 2:30 p.m. So you should be able to start trying to log in there, okay? Also, on Sunday is when you're going to actually get your email with your AP ID, right? I think you can go and find it right now on the College Board website. I'm going to put out a video on basically how to get to that, hopefully, and just test taping stuff. But basically, log in for AP testing at 2:30 p.m. All right. Have your notes, books, etc. on your desk. All right. Ready to go. 2:30. Okay. So that is next Tuesday at 2:30 is when the test is. All right. So, well, I mean, next Tuesday at 3, but log in at 2:30. So really, when is it? 2:30. Just have that in your mind. 2:30. Okay. All right. So today it's all about agriculture. So I'm going to share my screen and get us to this. All right. Oops. There we go. Move this over to the side, and we're going to go to this module, right? We go all the way down to agriculture, all the way down here. We can just go to the review page for agriculture and land use, all right? You can check out those Quizlets. Those are really, really useful, right? But the main thing we're going to be focusing on today is the agriculture review right here, all right? So agriculture review. This is a single presentation with quick explanations for pretty much everything in the unit. All right. This is something that we learned this semester, so it shouldn't be too out of your brain already. So I'm hoping you guys will do well on this. All right. The main idea: availability of resources and cultural practices influence agricultural practices and land use patterns. Basically, what we have and what we think influences what we do as far as agriculture goes. All right. So how are agricultural regions influenced by the natural environment? Basically, what the natural environment is like will determine what we can grow. All right. If we don't have enough rainfall to grow rice like this, you're going to grow something else. If you don't have enough rainfall to grow spinach, I think like this, all right, you're going to have to pipe it in. So that's one way that people can alter landscape to make agriculture possible, are these two ways where you make rice field or rice paddies, you bring in water through intricate irrigation systems, things like that, right? Also, this can have effects on the natural environment around us For example, here, this is the rainforest that has been cut down, destroyed, and burned to enrich the soil to make it to where humans can more easily graze animals on this, right? So this is basically being cut down so that we can have grassland, so that we can raise cattle, all right? And then right here, these wetlands are being drained over the course of just a few months because the water was needed to irrigate fields, okay? So, and you can see here, there's a lot of different agriculture, right? In developing countries, we see pastoral nomadism, which is that idea that humans move with herds of animal to find food for the animals, all right? So basically, humans would be nomadic. They would be moving nomadic herds across the land, and they would be trying to keep those herds alive by getting them to new foods and new sources of water consistently. And then we have the light green right here and right here. All right, those are the major areas. That's shifting cultivation. That's where you just basically chop down a small section of the forest, burn it, small section, okay? And then you plant on it, you grow for a few years, and then you move to a new section of the forest, all right? And you basically can do this in a loop, all right? Allowing the sections of forest that you burn down to come back later, okay? To where you can then burn down that part of the forest again, re-enrich the soil and grow there. So you're shifting your areas of cultivation around your location, which is why it's called shifting cultivation. And then there's intensive subsistence, all right? That's this dark green here. Intensive means there's a lot of work, a lot of effort that goes into growing the things you're wanting to grow, but then also it's subsistence because the people who are doing the growing, most of the food is going to feed them and their family. All right, basically people are growing food for themselves. And where we see this mostly right now is in South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. All right, and it's really interesting because they put intensive subsistence wet rice dominant to where most people are doing it with rice paddies and things like that. They put that as Japan, which is really interesting because I don't consider Japan a developing country. I don't consider Japanese farmers really being subsistence farmers. All right, they don't really. There are not that many subsistence farmers in Japan. All right, but at the same time, I think what they're really honing in on is this idea of wet rice dominant, to where these are the areas of the world where rice is the main staple, to where rice is the food that most people in these areas eat. So these are the areas that are growing rice a lot. All right. And then there's intensive subsistence, which is the same general idea of a lot of work going in. It's for keeping the people who are doing the farming alive, right? Subsistence farming, but it's not wet rice dominant. So that would be like wheat and things like that. And you can see it has a little bit, it goes further north, all right? And that's because we have winter wheat that can grow in cold temperatures and things like that. It reaches up from, India and Southeast Asia all the way north through China into Russia. And then it's also in the Middle East, which is really where the hearth of wheat started, was in this region of the world. All right. And then we go through developed countries, right? We have mixed crop and livestock. Basically, that's like traditional farms that you see on American television, where they're raising cattle, they're raising pigs, they're growing corn, and they're growing wheat. You're growing a bunch of different things all at once, right? That's mixed crop and livestock, and that's what you see in a bunch of the US, all right? You also see it all throughout Europe, all right? You'll see it down here in South America and Southern Africa, all right? And the reason that you see these in these ranges is because, okay, if you actually look at the latitude, basically around 40 degrees latitude, up to 60 degrees, down to 20 degrees is where you're seeing it. And you see that same thing right here. Between 20 and 40 degrees is where you're going to see some mixed crop and livestock, all right? And then we have dairy. That's where it's much easier to raise cattle to milk, to make their milk into various products like butter and cheese, all right? That's in northern areas, okay, to where you don't have to worry as much about like, hey, am I gonna be able to grow tomatoes? No, I'm not gonna be able to grow tomatoes, but I can get those from southern places. So I'm going to grow cattle on grasses that grow in these areas, and then I can sell the milk and butter and cheese and things like that. And then grain, we have that's purely like those areas are developed countries producing grain for sale, either to people who are raising cows and things like people who are raising livestock, or it's for sale for to large companies and things like that to make bread and things like that, right? And then there's livestock ranching. Livestock ranching is more free roaming. Dairy is when the cows are kept on a single farm and they're looked after very intensely. All right. Livestock ranching, where it's wide open spaces for the herds of cow to move across. That's going to be extensive farming. Okay. And that is happening a lot in the Western US, down in South America. All right. And then it's also happening in Central Asia a lot. Also, huge amount in Australia. Okay, and then Mediterranean. That's basically where you need a very specific type of climate, which we see Mediterranean along the Mediterranean Ocean, over here through the Black Sea and into the Caspian Sea, and then also it's in California. So that is a huge benefit to American agriculture because we are one of the few places in the world that can actually grow. That's a developing or the developed country that has access to Mediterranean agriculture. So that's a huge benefit for our agriculture in America. And then we have this dark purple. That's along the east coast of America and in certain areas of the West. And basically that's commercial gardening. And that's where you have truck farming and things like that. Basically, people are just doing it's smaller plots of land, but they're making really, really valuable foods like tomatoes, like blueberries, like strawberries. All right, it's very, stuff that generally costs a little bit more, and they can grow it close to the city, and they basically take it in big trucks directly to the population centers that are near this area. Okay, same up here near the area. All right, so agricultural regions are defined by the extent to which they reflect subsistence or commercial. So are they just doing it for feeding their family and the people around them, or are they doing it to take part in agribusiness? All right. And then is it intensive or extensive? Intensive, you're putting a lot of work, a lot of labor, a lot of capital, a lot of time into keeping up with the work on the farm, right? Or is it extensive where, hey, you know what? Yeah, it's a lot of work, but at the same time, it's spread out over a vast, vast area, or you don't have to put as much capital and things like that into it. That's extensive. Okay. So what are some examples of intensive farming practices? That's like feedlots. That would be somebody who only has a couple acres, but they're getting a lot of fresh produce out of it. So like, for example, you guys remember the inner city farms we saw in some of those videos? That would be intensive farming. Extensive farming, that would be like large fields of corn, large fields of wheat, livestock ranching, where cows are able to roam for miles and miles and miles to get to different pastures and eat different grass. Okay. And we can see here different rural settlement patterns. All right. We have dispersed. That's where the settlements are very spread out from each other. Okay. There's not a central hub or really anything like that. Then there's linear. That's where basically there's one mode of transportation that everyone works with. So everybody just clusters along that linear road, or in some cases a river, so that they can get to the transportation as quickly as possible. And then clustered, that's all the way to the left, which is basically like the small towns you see all across Western America and in rural areas in America all over, where basically they're just clustered up in little groups. And then people live in town and stuff and things like that. And then there's farmers who actually go out to their fields and things like that. All right. Basically, clustered is done for, clustered like this was originally done for defense. So people in cities like this could easily defend themselves. All right. People had linear, so they could easily, it was basically like we need to be able to get to a road or a river as quickly as possible, right? And then also dispersed, and then we get to dispersed, which was basically, those are areas where it's generally safer, people could spread out more, and they didn't necessarily want to be right next to their neighbors, Okay. And then we have here types of land survey patterns. We have mets and bounds, which is basically just where it's all about identifying distance and direction using both physical landmarks, physical boundaries, and measurements of land. So you might say, hey, my land is to that big tree on the hill, or hey, my land actually goes along the ridge of this the ridge of this hill. All right, my land goes down to the end of the valley, things like that. So that would be mets and bounds, and you get really, really weird squiggly boundaries. All right. Then township and range. That's a rectangular land division. It was designed by Thomas Jefferson to disperse settlers evenly across farmlands of the U.S. interior. Basically, Thomas Jefferson wanted the vast majority of people in America to be farmers, and they wanted to chop up and sell all the land they bought in from the Louisiana Purchase really quickly. So they developed this system which would allow it to just, you could quickly, easily measure it and plot it out and sell it as quickly as possible, right? And then long lots, that's the French settlement pattern. So basically like this bottom line right here would be like a river, and they would have these long, narrow lots that went back off of major rivers and roads. So this is what you traditionally saw with linear settlement patterns in American North and Northeast, right? And that's because they were trying to get as much stuff out of the land as possible, and while also being like, they would have their houses close to the river or the road, and so you could easily communicate with your neighbors, easily help your neighbors defend themselves, things like that was happening with long lots. All right. So intensive agriculture that involves greater inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used. All right, this would be market gardening and fruit farming. All right, this is the most dominant type of agriculture in the Southeast. Okay, truck farming is another type of is another name for this. It's relying on migrant workers, fertilizers, and machinery. Basically, you're trying to get the most amount of money out of your small amount of land as possible. And so you're going to try and get people who will work for very little amounts of money, migrant workers. You're trying to make it to where your crops produce the most amount of crops possible. That's fertilizer. Or you take the migrant workers out of it and you just get machinery that'll pick your crops for you. So crops like this are apples, asparagus, cherries, lettuce, mushrooms, tomatoes. All right. All that stuff would be market gardening and fruit farming. All right. And then we have plantation agriculture. That was in the tropics and subtropics. This is what really started slavery, and it was all about cash crops, trying to get as much money as possible out of these new places in Latin America, Africa, and Asia for the colonizers from Europe, right? So where were plantations important farmer agriculture? In all these places. In the US, it was in the South, right? That's where they were trying to grow tobacco and cotton to make as much money as possible. Once you got further south, closer to the equator, that's where you saw sugarcane and things like that. Also rubber plantations were very big. Banana plantations, things like that were also very big. So plantation agriculture was really the start of slavery, right? So not too great. Okay, but at the same time, it was incredibly beneficial to the economies of the areas that were practicing them, even though the human suffering associated with them were incredible. It's like through plantation agriculture, that's why America's one of the strongest economies in the world, right? So we have a rough past, right? America needs to get be cognizant of the fact that basically our wealth now and our status as one of the richest countries in the world right now is entirely based upon plantation agriculture and slavery. All right, and then we have mixed crop and livestock. That's where you see here, right? You have sheep who are actually going through and eating the grasses in this field right next to a large field that will be planted with something else. I don't know what they're going to plant it with, right? Most distinctive characteristic is the integration of crops and livestock. So basically, crops and livestock live on the same land, right? Most of the crops are fed to the animal, and the manure gives soil fertility. So you have it to where the animals are helping the plants, and the plants are helping the animals, right? This allows farmers to more evenly distribute the workload through the year. So basically, when you're not dealing with having to do the planting and everything or the harvesting, you can actually look after the animals. And basically, it makes it to where instead of having just like 2 seasons where they're doing a huge amount of work, they have it more generally spread out across the whole year. All right. Corn and soybeans are the most important crops in the U.S. mixed commercial farming region. So corn and soybeans would then be fed to the animals, which would get bigger, and their manure would be used to fertilize the corn and soybean fields. And then eventually those animals would either be, like in the case of these sheep, sheared for their wool or killed for meat. Okay. And then we have extensive. This is where there's fewer inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used, where basically the farmers actually put in less money and less labor. They don't have to hire as many people to do the act of farming their farm, of harvesting, of planting, all that stuff. All right. There's shifting cultivation. That's where farmers clear land by planting, clear land for planting by slashing vegetation and burning everything. Shifting cultivation is sometimes called slash and burn. Right. Farmers grow crops on a cleared field for a few years, only until the soil nutrients are depleted, and then leave it fallow for many years so the soil can recover. All right. This also is intertillage. You see a lot. It's where they're growing multiple types of crops. So they might have a line of yams, and then they would have a line of cassava, and then they would have a line of I don't know, wild chestnuts, right? Or not chestnuts, but wild water chestnuts, right? So there's all these things that happen where basically it's groups of people coming together, and they're not putting as much money in because they don't need fertilizer, because they're burning the vegetation in this area to get those nutrients into the soil. And once they set up their crops, they'll just kind of keep growing each year without having to do a lot of work, and then they'll move to a new area, right? And this, even though, here's the thing, even though there's a lot of people working right here, right, the actual amount of labor going into it, because once you have it set up, you just set and grow your stuff. You don't have to worry about it too much, because in these areas, it rains enough to where you don't have to worry about watering it. You don't have to worry about too many natural predators, because they'll have little, basically, fences around to keep things out. Okay. And basically it's just a lot less labor than the intensive stuff we saw earlier. All right. There's also nomadic herding. That's where basically you just move your herd around with you, and they will eat the things they find. All right. The humans who do this, all right, it's where they're depending primarily on animals rather than crops for survival. So they'll drink milk. They'll actually use the blood of animals to make things and as a drink. All right. But they'll just get a little bit of blood, right? They'll collect it in a bowl, and then they'll kind of seal it up, right? They'll kind of do medical care on the animal, or veterinary care on the animal to stop that bleeding. So their whole life is all about living off of these animals they're helping, okay, that they're working with. All right. They're usually in drier climates where planting crops is not possible. So you really just need your animals to go and eat the wild animal, or the wild crops, the wild fruits, vegetables, and plants that are out there already that they can eat, but we can't. Right. And this is like the Bedouins in Saudi Arabia and North Africa, and the Maasai of East Africa. Fatima just asked, do they eat the animals? Yes, they do, but they generally only eat the animals when they're actually at the end of their life. Or if it's like, oh, that animal broke a leg, okay, we'll kill it and we'll eat it. Oh, this calf in particular is very weak and sickly, and we don't think it'll survive. All right, we'll kill it and eat it. Basically, they're trying to make sure that the stronger members of their herds stay alive for as long as possible, so they can get like the most benefits out of the animals. All right. So what do they eat then? Plants? Yeah, they do eat some of the plants and stuff, but they're eating wild plants, wild fruits, wild vegetables, wild things like that. And that's why they have to move so often. It's because they're eating some of the things, their herd is eating some of the things, and they eat some of the herd. They also a lot like the Maasai of East Africa right here. That's a group that actually subsists a lot on blood of their cattle herds. So like they take the blood, they might drink some of it, but then also, which like blood's super nutrient rich for humans, they can use it, and they can actually make like food from blood. All right. So it's very, very common, right? And then we have livestock ranching, which is what we traditionally see in the US. I think this is either in Wyoming or Colorado, given the mountains, right? Cows and sheep are the most important ranched animals. Okay, cows because they make a lot of food, they make a lot of beef, all right, and then sheep because they can make food, but it's more important to get their wool, and the wool is really really great because it makes great really great clothes. Okay, ranching is the commercial grazing of livestock over an extensive area where you're trying to not just raise it for yourself, you're trying to raise it to sell. All right, type of agriculture is best suited for dry climates, but due to increased irrigation practices, most land given to ranching has been converted to crop production, right? So we're seeing more and more where basically the amount of land that ranchers are actually ranchers are actually ranching on, it's going down each year because as our irrigation practices get better and we have GMOs that can we have GMOs that can basically subsist in drier climates. It's becoming more and more profitable to have these crops on these dry lands and basically make it to where ranching isn't happening on them as much, right? Agriculture has changed over time because of cultural diffusion and advances in technology, right? So basically, like rice production has moved from where it originally started in its cultural hearth and spread out over a large portion of the world. All right. Advances in technology. If we go all the way back to that initial slide we saw with the rice paddies and the sprinkler system, right? That sprinkler system is an advance in technology that allows irrigation to happen easier and over a larger portion of the earth than before. Okay. So you need to know the general crop hearths and diffusion. All right, remember Latin America was a primary hearth. That means that it's really, really important. And this is where we got everything from squash, pepper, cassava, cotton, lima beans, maize, potato, and sweet potato. So the really, really, really important one is maize, corn. Corn now makes up a huge portion of the world's diet. All right. And it came from Latin America. It came from, they believe, southern Mexico in the highlands, right? So they're kind of mountainous regions that maize spread from, but it spread all over North and South America before the Columbian exchange. Then we have in sub-Saharan Africa, that's where you get yams, sorghum, cowpea, African rice, coffee, and finger millet. All right. In Southeast Asia, the really important one here is wheat. All right. Bread wheat. Okay. Einkorn wheat, emmer wheat. Basically understand that the wheats, right? The grains that make up the other huge portion of humanity's diet across the entire planet. All right. That was basically found in the Middle East and then diffused to the rest of the old world, to where it was being grown in Africa, it was being grown in Europe, it was being grown in Asia, and is a huge part of people's diets for a long time, right? And then East Asia and Southeast Asia, basically, we're not sure exactly where rice was first domesticated. It's thought to be, South Asia, East Asia, or Southeast Asia. Nobody really knows, but it's been around for a very long time. If you see years ago, all this stuff was like domesticated. Rice was domesticated over 9,000 years ago. All right. So it's a very old, very, very old process. Right. But you still have rice and soybeans are the really, really important ones coming out of East Asia. Southeast Asia has mango, taro, and coconut. Those are all really important. Coconut got spread by the Polynesian people from this area, spreading all over the Pacific, and that's why coconuts are all over the Pacific. All right, so it's really important. India, you see here, is a secondary a secondary hearth. That's because it got stuff from Southeast Asia and East Asia, and then basically grew it, and then helped move it further west to where you got rice into these areas. All right. So hearths, what is a hearth? It's basically where stuff started, right? Early hearths of domestication of plants and animals are the Fertile Crescent, that's in the Middle East, the Indus River Valley, that's in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central America or Latin America. All right, those are huge, really, really important hearths of domestication of plants and animals. All right, diffusion. How did various plants and animals become globalized? It's because of colonization, right? When European colonizers came from the old world of Europe, Africa, and Asia, they brought all this stuff with them, like onions, olives, turnips, grapes, citrus fruits, bananas, sugarcane, peaches, grains, honeybees, livestock, all this stuff went into South America, North America. And all these things like sweet potatoes, squash, turkeys, tobacco, pineapples, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, right? All that stuff. Corn is a huge one. All those things came from North and South America and basically got brought back by those same colonizers to Europe, Africa, and Asia, all right? So we see here, if you really want to read about the agricultural revolution, read it right here. The most important thing to understand is that the agricultural revolutions are basically how humans got better and better and better at doing agriculture. The first agricultural revolution is this time period where initial domestication starts and the diffusion of all of these crops to different groups of people around the world. All right. And then we hit the second agricultural revolution. That's when European farming methods really embrace a bunch of different sides of this. Basically, the main thing that they did is they got better technology and they got better at figuring out how to farm better to where it's more productive. Okay. They figured out crop rotation. They figured out how to make really good tools that would last a long time and makes the work easier. Also, they improved breeding and animal husbandry to make their animals larger, and thus one animal could feed more people more. All right. So we'll keep going. So how are the industrial and agricultural revolutions linked? Basically, the seed drill created by Jethro Tull, right, planted neat rows of seed. A machine that was created during the Industrial Revolution helped increase agricultural output, which is what the agricultural revolution was. Crop yields per acre were increased by new knowledge about what techniques would allow plants to grow. Fertilizers, mineral, and soil content were all factors that started to be taken into account. Basically, they got really good at the science of agriculture and figured out, okay, what fertilizer do I need to add? What minerals can I find in the soil? And what is my soil actually like, right? What things grow best in my soil, right? So people started figuring out the kind of behind the scenes stuff for how to grow or how well your plants grow, right? New tools and processes were developed to ensure that less people were needed to grow increasing amounts of food. Basically, we figured out how to grow bigger fruits and vegetables. We figured out how to grow or raise larger livestock. So we needed less people to make more amounts of food. We got better farm machinery like the McCormick Reaper. So we increased our productivity. And then the enclosure movement occurred through the 1700s, where basically common land, which used to be allowed for anyone to use. Anyone could go into the common land and set up a farm, or not a farm, but a field, and grow things. Everyone was allowed to go into the common land and get the wood they needed. Anyone could be allowed to go into the common land and gather fruits and vegetables they found, all right? But then it eventually got all split up to where there were specific people owning specific areas, and it made it to where the common land was now privately owned, all right? It was enclosed by fences, and this made it more productive, but it also cut back on that communal understanding of what the land was and what the land did for people. So like the enclosure movement is really that first meshing of capitalism and agriculture, that first meshing of an economic system and an agricultural system where people were actually owning the land, all right, which influences a huge amount of economic systems and political systems in the future. And then we have in the 1950s and 60s, that's when we have the Green Revolution, all right? Basically, through the use of GMOs and increased scientific knowledge of fertilizers and things like that, we had the Green Revolution, which saw the yields of each plant we grew shot through the roof. Basically, we figured out how to get the most amount of food out of every plant, all right? We also figured out how to make our plants more resistant to pests like bugs, and we made it more resistant to drought and things like that, to where we were losing less of our produce each year, which caused a huge benefit of how many people could be fed with our agricultural system. All right. And you guys, we had, some negatives of the Green Revolution. We have a lot more pollution from agriculture now. We have this idea that GMOs might go too far to where now it's affecting allergies and things like that. That's something that's really interesting, because like people think there might be a connection between genetically modified food and like rapidly genetically modified food conducted in the lab, and allergies and things like that, right? Also, Green Revolution also took into account, like, we got better tractors. We have, now we have those massive tractors where like one guy and one really big tractor can, basically harvest a huge field of wheat in one day, while that used to take, 20 people 2 weeks to do. All right. So it's incredibly productive now. All right. You can see here, right, the positives: agriculture now outpaces population. So essentially, we shouldn't have an issue with feeding people. It's not a supply issue. It's a distribution issue, to where basically the people who are hungry nowadays, it's purely because they can't get the food to them fast enough, right? Nitrogen-based fertilizers increase farm productivity. Scientists were inventing new foods and food sources, right? We have higher productivity, which reduces our dependency on imports from like China and India. So it's basically cutting back on the amount of imports we have to get from other countries, which helps our country. All right. Irrigation has increased crop yields, and agribusiness has increased the productivity of cash crops. So you can have less people working in the agricultural sector, but still producing as much. But there are some negatives, right? Poor countries can't afford all this stuff. They can't afford the machinery. They can't afford the fertilizer, right? They're using, if they do use fertilizers, it's more likely in poorer countries to lead to groundwater pollution, which affects a lot of people and can get people sick, all right? Overfishing can happen, where people basically pull too many fish out of the ocean or out of rivers, and thus there isn't enough population to actually reproduce, all right? Sub-Saharan Africa population is still growing faster than food. All right, irrigation has led to serious groundwater pollution or depletion, to where basically they're pulling too much water out of the ground, to where now people who used to rely on wells for their drinking water can't get to the water anymore. And also, agribusiness makes it to where there's a lot more monocultures happening, where basically all the land is growing one crop, to where if anything goes wrong with that one crop, people lose their livelihood and people go out of business, or people go broke, and people basically have a really, really hard time, right? So the availability of resources and cultural practices influence agricultural practices and land use patterns. We talked about that a little bit, right? Basically, it's the difference between subsistence versus commercial. Subsistence, you're growing for consumption of the farmer's family and areas in the people around them, right? You're growing for you, your family, and your village, all right? Commercial farming, it's really, you're growing all the stuff to sell it. All right, you're growing all the stuff to sell it to people who live in urban areas, to sell it to companies to make into food. So if I had a big farm with a bunch of grain, I might take all that grain and save a tiny little bit for my family, but most of my grain is actually going to be sold to the company that makes Pop-Tarts. All right, so basically the three factors that can distinguish subsistence from commercial, so you can always know this, right? Percentage of farmers in the labor force. So if you have a very, 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 you have a very, very, very high amount of farmers in your labor force, where farmers make up most of your country, right? That's going to mean that subsistence is the big thing there, because each farmer is making less and trying to feed the people directly around him. So there needs to be more farmers, all right? If there's very few amount of farmers, it's more likely to be commercial. They are running it like a business, so they're trying to reduce the amount of people who are working in agriculture to increase the profits for the people who are working, all right? There's the use of machinery, basically subsistence, very little machinery use. Commercial, lots of machinery use. And the size of the farm. Subsistence, more farmers, all right? That means that the farms are going to be smaller. If there are more farmers, you can't take the actual land of the entire country and divide it by 100 and have everybody use half that country. That's not going to work, right? That doesn't work mathematically. So if you're subsistence, you have much smaller plots that you're working. Commercial, much larger plots, all right? So commercial, you have larger farms. The effects of commercial agriculture, right? Large-scale commercial agriculture are replacing small family farms. It's because they're more effective, they're more productive, they create more money, All right. At the same time, it's not always great that they're so productive because we have a lot of food waste. All right. Not all of these tomatoes will be used. A lot of these tomatoes will rot and not be used. Okay. Commercial agriculture. What did I do? What's going on here? Let's go in, go all the way down. Okay. Oops. Let's go back. So, commercial agriculture is characterized by integration of steps, different steps, usually through ownership by large corporations. That's the commodity chain, right? Where they own the farm, they own the processing plant, where they make it from being a tomato on a vine to just a tomato like this. They own this cooking facility in the background where all these tomatoes are cooked into, a pasta sauce, right? And then they own the packaging company, they own the shipping company that gets that pasta sauce to stores. They're all owned by large corporations, right? Location, location, location. Basically, the factors that affect the food processing facilities include markets. Where do we sell our food? The economies of scale. Okay, how close can we get our factories or our production centers to the shipping area, or to the shipping company, to the packaging company, right? The transportation. How do we ship things? The government policies. Hey, how can we get a subsidy for this? All right. All of those things matter. The location of the farm is affected by all of these things. All right. The global supply chain, basically how we distribute food and everything around the world. The main elements of the global food distribution networks are affected by political relationships. So, hey, am I going to have to pay a tariff to get this product into this country? Infrastructure. Hey, how easy is it for me to transport this across the country? And then also patterns of world trade. Okay, well, if my country is at war with another country, I'm probably not going to do a lot of business with that country, right? We have here, basically, this is showing, again, the commodity chain. This time it's for fish, all right? So you have the company that owns the R&D, the research and development, technology support for research management, all right? The production and capture. So, hey, do we go out and capture wild fish? Or are we raising them in a tank? Or are we raising them in a tank that also supports agriculture? Okay, and then, hey, we gotta collect it. We gotta box it up. All right, we gotta chop it into fish sticks. That's that preparation of value-added products. All right, and then we go to distribution and logistics. So how do we package it? How do we ship it to the people who want to buy it? All right, and then the people who want to buy it, do they want to consume it in a restaurant, or do they want to have large-scale buyers that then go to stores and things like that? All right, so all of this stuff is involved with the economy of scale. Okay, we can see here, basically, economies of scale is an economic term that describes a competitive advantage that larger entities have over smaller entities. So that economy of scale is another reason why we have factory farms versus family farms. Manufacturing costs can fall 70 to 90% every time the business doubles its output. So if you have more people, if you have a larger farm that's increasing the output, you're actually going to be reducing your costs after a while. All right. Then diseconomies of scale can result if a company becomes less efficient. So if you're trying to produce too much, sometimes it causes your cost per unit to go up. A lot of the time, the reason for this upswing is because you need a place to store all your units. You need a place to store all the stuff you've made before it goes to market. All right. So internal benefits would be the sheer size of the company allows bulk purchases. So you can buy more stuff and sell more stuff at one time. Then there's external benefits. That's where basically companies get preferential treatment from governments and other external sources. You get benefits where, like, a shipping company might sign a contract with a food company to where they'll ship your food for less money if you ship through that shipping company for the next 10 years. All right. That's that external benefit of being a company, or a larger company. Also, larger shipping companies can use ships that carry as many goods as 16 freight trains. So basically, it's the different transportation types, because like a family farmer can't afford to actually have a huge ship like this. But remember, it's cheaper to move goods by boat like this than by trains like these. All right. So then we get into bid rent theory. That's that whole idea that land cost is determined by distance from markets, distance from cities. All right. So the price and demand for land changes as it gets further away from the market. So it's all about maximizing profits. Okay. Being close to the market increases the potential for more customers. There's a trade-off between accessibility and cost of land. So the distance down here, basically the further you are away from your city, which would be this north-south line right here, the further you are away, well, the problem is that there's definitely a period of time where your tomatoes are going to rot before they get to the city. So your tomato farm needs to be close to the city. All right. Wheat can go a little bit longer. It's really, really nice. It has a nice, long, stable shelf life. But there's still going to be a point where it will rot. All right. So it's basically, you can see here, cattle, right? Having it closer to the city, having it be fresher isn't really a huge benefit, because as long as the cow's alive before it gets to the butcher, right, it'll stay fresh from the point it's butchered, and the butcher is going to be at the market. So cattle can stay fresher for the longest amount of time. All right. Then it goes wheat, then it goes tomatoes. So depending on where you're at, how far you are from your central business area, all right, your market, your city, all right, depending on that, that's going to determine which area along this curve right here, you really need to be focused on. All right, and I'm going to have spotlight. There we go. So we have right here, along that curve right there, that's going to be determining all this stuff. All right, so let's keep going. And then we have von Thunen's model. That's where basically you have the urban center, you have the market. We see this is basically a top-down representation of this graph. All right, basically market gardening is the most important because it can be done right by the market, right by the center, right? And then you go out to dairy farming. That's where milk and things like that go bad a little bit faster. Forest, it's because forests are really heavy, so the transportation costs can be wider or greater, all right? And then grains and field crops, and then ranching and livestock, okay? So von Thunen's model emphasizes the importance of transportation costs, all right? This explains the contemporary distribution of agricultural regions like dairy, horticulture, which is market gardening, things like that, and wheat. So basically, the further you get away from cities, the more likely you are to see wheat fields and ranching and livestock. Okay. This is another key understanding. Agricultural production and consumption patterns vary in different locations. Basically, people like different foods in different places. This is presenting different environmental, social, economic, and cultural opportunities and challenges. All right. The role of the farmer. The farmer's changed over generations. On a typical day, what do you imagine a farmer does? All right. So olden times, the farmer would just get up, look after his animals, look after his fields, and that's it. Nowadays, farmers are needing to do research. They need to figure out what crops, what seeds are going to work best in their area. They need to figure out what the market wants. So, hey, do they need to change what crop they're growing consistently? They need to understand how to integrate their production of goods with the shipping as quickly as possible. So how do we do the creation of our fruits, vegetables, and plants, all right, that we're going to eat? How do we package that as quickly as possible and then ship that out as quickly as possible? So farmers are using more and more technology every day, and it's changing what their role is, right? To where now, instead of being just a primary sector job, to where all you were doing was just basically getting stuff out of the earth by raising livestock, by growing plants, right? Now they're having to do all aspects of it, to where they're doing research. They're involved with secondary roles of getting products to people. They're involved with the actual sale of these products to larger companies or restaurants and things like that, right? Now, we do have some environmental consequences that come along with agriculture, like sustainability. It's really, really difficult to grow the same thing on the same plot of land forever if you don't have a way to enrich the soil. And that soil degradation will happen if you don't enrich the soil. There's a reduction in biodiversity which is a problem, because if we have a collapse, right? If we have colony collapse disorder,
or those giant murder hornets kill all of the American honeybees, suddenly a huge amount of our crops won't be able to be pollinated. And, so some of our crops might die out because we have such a lack of biodiversity. Overgrazing can happen. That's where cattle eat too much of the ground cover, eat too much of the grass in an area to where now it's just dirt and it basically blows away. That was a huge factor in the Dust Bowl, right? And also they basically tilled the land too much. They basically tilled too much of the central area of the US to where once it got really dry, they had a little drought. Suddenly all that dirt that used to be nice, good dirt turns into sand and is blown away by the wind. There's also river and aquifer depletion. Basically, we're using a huge amount of our water sources to help with agriculture. All right, animal waste can go into those water sources and pollute them and cause people to get sick. All right, you can remember if we go down to Florida, there was that whole canal system that basically allowed farmers to raise livestock and raise crops along an old Everglades system. Well, now all the animal waste from those are going down into that canal system and being washed into a lake that is getting people sick around that lake. And then there's extensive fertilizer and pesticide use. That's changing biodiversity through pesticide use. It's basically killing certain pests and things like that, wiping out populations of bugs and weeds and things like that. And then also that fertilizer, again, can go into those rivers and aquifers and cause people to get sick and cause pollution, all right? Then we have the fact that environmental systems are being affected by land use and land coverage change, all right? Irrigation, if we irrigate too much and we take water out of some areas, that can lead to desertification in other areas, all right? Deforestation can happen if too much of the forest is cut down, it's not allowed enough time to regrow. And so suddenly you have areas that used to be able to be covered by forest that can't anymore because the soil isn't holding to the ground as much. You have desertification kind of happening on hillsides and things. Wetland destruction, basically whole environments for wild animals being destroyed because they're being turned into plains and things like that for all this stuff, for livestock raising. And then it's leading to conservation efforts where conservationists are trying to protect grasslands from desertification. They're trying to protect forests from deforestation. They're trying to protect wetlands from destruction, right? And you can see here, right? Environmental impacts of agriculture. Basically, traditional agriculture led to forest clearing, soil erosion, and depletion of nutrients. But all of these things could be fixed in a relatively short amount of time, right? They could just, pull back from a forest and it would recover, right? You could pull back from an area and the soil would be recovered, or you could plant specific crops and that would recover the soil. Depletion of nutrients, if they got into basically crop rotations, that could stop depletion of nutrients because certain crops put nutrients into the ground and other crops take them out, right? Then there's modern agriculture, where you can have a salinity problem. Basically, people fertilize too much and there's not enough water going into it, and that causes basically the salt in the fertilizer to basically build up in the ground and cause it to where you can't grow anything there. There's also waterlogging. You can overwater crops, which causes the land to become too wet, and then the natural plants can't live there anymore. And you can have it to where you can even overwater your crops you're growing and kill them off. The pesticide related impacts, to where you have pest resistance problem. Suddenly your pesticides don't work because you used it for too long and you didn't change it up. There's also a loss of many non-target species. So some of those pesticides might hurt bees over time, to where these pesticides that are keeping things that are eating your crops away from your crops, it's also killing the pollinators of your crops. It kills the butterflies. It kills the bees. There's biological magnification. That's where basically so much focus is put on one thing that you forget about everything else, and thus everything else is being sacrificed for that one thing. All right. There's fertilizer related impacts. There's a micronutrient imbalance, basically to where the ground is imbalanced so much in favor of one thing that in favor of one crop that other crops can't grow there, other plants can't grow there. There's nitrate pollution. that's when basically you have so much fertilizer going into an area that it's killing things off because it's kind of being burned by how rich the soil is. I don't know what eutrophication is. I don't know what that is. Right? I need to look that up. I forgot to look that up. All right. Impacts related to high yielding varieties. They're easy to attack by pathogens. So like, hey, the corn we grow today, if basically there's a disease that comes in and wipes out the corn population like it happened in the 70s, that would be really, really bad. There's also rapid nutrient loss. A lot of the time, bigger crops aren't necessarily as nutritious because the focus for the company is to make the crops as big as possible, not as nutritious as possible. So even though your apple goes from being this big to being this big, right? That apple is not as nutritious, or it's the same amount of nutrition as a small apple, but it's in a bigger package to where it's less nutrient dense. Okay. And we can see here, there's water stress all over the world. All right. In very, very hot regions, it's very common for water stress to be extremely high. If we look in India in particular, there's a huge amount of water stress, which is really scary because there's over 1 billion people in India, and everyone needs water, right? Same with Mexico. Mexico has a very high population, but over half their country is under a huge amount of water stress, all right? And we have it in America too. This water stress down in Los Angeles, one of the largest population centers in America, it's all under water stress because all the water is being piped off for agricultural use in the central area of California. It's really, really dangerous, all right? And then we can have societal effects. Basically, people are being pulled away through modern issues of not having enough time to engage in agriculture, not having enough time to grow their own crops. So they're not understanding what goes into their food, which causes people to eat easy to find things instead of nutritious things. All right. But we do have some benefits of like here, right? This would be a neighborhood garden. All right. If people actually work on neighborhood gardens more, they understand their food better and they have an understanding of what they're eating, which can make them make healthier choices. All right. Also, we have influences on food production. Basically, food choices are causing people to change how agricultural production happens, right? More people are wanting organic fruits and vegetables and organic farming practices used, right? There's value-added specialty crops. This deer is actually on a farm because basically more people are wanting venison in America. So we're trying to grow more, or we're trying to raise more deer and things like that. We're trying to raise more deer for venison meat, all right? So that we can basically have those value-added crops to where, deer are probably not going to be as harmful on the environment as cattle. You won't be able to grow as many as you could, or raise as many deer as you could cattle. But at the same time, if the deer meat is worth more, you're actually getting more money for less degradation of the soil and things like that through specialty crops, right? There's also fair trade. Basically, hey, we want to make sure that everyone who works in the agricultural industry is getting a fair wage, right? So migrant workers, the people who actually pick things like lettuce and tomatoes and things like that, they should be getting a fair wage, right? A lot of people are moving toward fair trade things. Also, local food movements, basically, hey, I don't want my tomato to come all the way from Washington or all the way from Virginia. I want to eat a tomato that's grown in the Houston area, all right? So you have to have a market. You have to have some kind of chain that gets products from A to B. So that's why not that many farmers raise deer, elk, and buffalo. But things can change. People can want those specialty crops more and more, right? And then there's the individual food choice movements. That's where you have people who are looking for urban farming. People want community-supported agriculture where neighborhoods get together and actually decide, hey, this lot is going to be used to grow food for the neighborhood, right? You have organic farming, you have those value-added crops, those local food movements, and those dietary shifts where a lot of people are moving away from meat. And guys, you're going to see meat production in the US, which relies on a lot of people to actually go and carve up all the carcasses for the meat, all right, that you eat in the supermarket. You're going to start seeing meat production issues now because those people are getting sick and they're staying home because they don't want to get other people sick or they don't want to get sick from their coworkers. So you'll actually see less meat on supermarket shelves and it'll cost more. So more people might be incentivized to have their dietary or their diet shift toward more of a vegetarian diet or less meat focused, right? A lot of people in America seem to believe you need meat at every meal, and that's not the case for most people in the world. All right. Then we have, organic farms, right? While dairy farming is decreasing, organic farm is increasing. People drink less milk now. People drink less milk and eat less dairy products, right? And why is there a shift toward organic farming? It's because people are scared about genetically modified organisms, right? Living organisms possess a novel combination of genetic material obtained through the use of modern biotechnology. People are worried about it affecting them in different ways. All right. So it's causing people to want organic foods, organic farming to take over. All right. And is it good or bad, right? Agricultural innovations have resulted in ongoing debates over environmental, cultural, and health impacts. One environmental impact is, hey, all this stuff from agricultural or the agribusiness is infecting our environment really badly, while organic farming generally has less of an environmental footprint. Right? There's the cultural fact that people are getting scared of GMOs. Right? There's also the health impacts of potentially GMO foods are less nutritionally dense, while organic foods are more nutritionally dense. But it's all kind of up in the air. Okay. So should GMOs be labeled? I really don't think this is going to be a focus for the AP exam, so I'm going to kind of go through it. Right now, if you're watching the video at home, pause it, read these, just so you have an idea of it. But for everybody who's just with this, go back and check it later. We talked about it a lot, all right? Then we see here, basically, the challenges of feeding a global population. A lot of people don't have access to food, all right? That's food insecurity and food deserts. That's where basically, if you see these areas in very populated areas like the Southeast, right, there's no supermarket store within a while and there's no car. So there are people who have a really hard time getting to areas or getting to places where they can effectively get nutritious food. Then you have like in rural areas, right, maybe there's no supermarket for a very long time, and that causes a huge amount of problem for people, okay? Also, there's problems with distribution centers, right? Basically companies, agribusinesses are not in the they're not in the charity business, so they're not going to try and make sure that their distribution gets to poorer people around the world, which is an issue. Adverse weather. Basically, climate change is changing our weather. Our climate is changing around us, and it is affecting how much food we can produce. If we have droughts, our food production will go down. If there's a lot of hurricanes, there's a lot of tornadoes, that can affect our food production. All right. Then there's also land loss. Land use loss to suburbanization. Basically, people want houses, people want yards and things like that. So suburbs are getting larger and larger, and the rural areas that used to be food producing areas around cities are basically having to deal with selling off the land around them to make money. And then that land is being turned into suburbs, right? Being turned into housing and things like that. You guys see that around us all the time as a bunch of these little family-owned farms where people are raising cattle and things like that. They're basically at this point just holding out to try and sell their land for millions of dollars to the companies that want to build neighborhoods on the land and things like that. All right. So that's it, guys. It only took us, let's see here, a long time. I don't even know how long this recording is, but thank you for sticking with me throughout it. That's agriculture. We went through all of agriculture in a week. We really focused on 3 things that I think you guys had trouble with, which was the von Thunen and bid rent theory, women in agriculture, and then commodity and supply chains. Right. So that's it. I want to again put this out there. Next Tuesday, log in to AP College Board at 2:30. Your AP exam begins at 3 p.m. You log in around 2:30. If you're having trouble, you have 30 minutes to get in. All right. You need to have your notes, books, etc. Anything you want to access, because remember, this is essentially an open note test. All right. But that doesn't mean you don't need to study. You need to be studying every day. You need to be studying every day for this exam. because if it comes up that what they're talking about, you don't have the notes for directly in front of you, or you don't understand it well enough to actually answer the FRQ questions, you're going to have problems. All right. So that's what I want you to do moving forward. All right. Today, all I want you to focus on for the actual rest of the day is just making sure that all of the work for this class is done. I see a lot of people who have not finished their work for this class, have not been timely about finishing their work, and they need to. All right. So with that, have a good day, y'all.